So, time for the press preview. It's our first look at what is on the front of Monday's papers. And this evening, we'll see what's making the headlines with political journalist Sophia Sleigh and the political commentator Benedict Spence. Great to see you both. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at some of the papers for you, including the Metro. You're out of order, reads its front page as it leads with the apology from Senior Cabinet Minister Michael Gove for what he called the indefensible Partygate video. The Guardian also features the video and says Rishi Sunak's attempts to move on from Boris Johnson have been set back, with police considering the footage. While the Daily Mail leads with the mortgage crisis as experts urge the Bank of England to pause interest rate hikes to ease the impact on homeowners. The Eye also follows this story with the headline "Banks told to ease soaring cost of mortgages as rates rise." The Times looks ahead to an expected tightening of rules for migrants so Britons can be the priority on council house lists. The FT International reports that AstraZeneca has drawn up plans to break out its China business and list it separately in Hong Kong to shelter the company against mounting geopolitical tension. And the Star reports on claims that brewers are lowering alcohol levels to save money. And don't forget, you can scan that QR code that you see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And I'm joined by political journalist Sophia Sleigh and also the political commentator Benedict Spence. Good to see you at the end of this weekend, a warm and muggy weekend it's been as well. Let's start with the front of the Metro, shall we? Following on from the Mirror's exclusive, remarkable exclusive this morning, this video of partying staff, despite the COVID rules at the time. Sophia, what do you make of the fallout from it?
Yeah, I mean, it's still rumbling on, isn't it? I mean, the Partygate shows no sign of going away yet. I mean, Michael Gove was out on the airwaves this morning and apologised quite willingly. He was very forward, I must say, in his apology. He was confronted with that video on a few TV shows, and he sort of strongly condemned the visuals, the people dancing and things like that. And he was very strong. He sort of said it was unacceptable and indefensible. I mean, I think when he was confronted with that footage, what else can you say, really? It's a terrible look. To be fair, I mean, we did know about this event. It has been reported before widely, but we only had a photograph of this event before. And I think the video in the age we now live in was really damning and really, really powerful. And I think also what was shocking about it is it's the voices in the background, people chatting, and there is an acknowledgement that essentially they probably were bending the rules. And, you know, this was in Conservative campaign headquarters. So although, you know, Michael Gove apologised for this morning, I don't think this is going to go anywhere anytime soon. I think Rishi Sunak will probably face uncomfortable questions about this, just when he doesn't want uncomfortable questions as well, when he's got a lot on his plate right now.
Yeah, and Benedict, there are still lots of sort of unanswered questions, aren't there? One of them is, why has this only come out now when we have seen stills from this party? We know the police investigated it at the time, and yet for some reason the video has only just emerged. Is the timing of that at all interesting, given that it comes just after the publication of the report and before tomorrow's vote, or is it coincidental? What do you think it might be?
I mean, I do think that it's something that's possibly been held back with the intention of elongating the pain for the government, you know, especially in the sort of the post-Boris Johnson era. I'm sure that there will be plenty of people who will want it to be the people that are reminded that it is not just Boris Johnson who was responsible for what was going on behind the scenes, that there were other members of the government who have perhaps moved on or moved up or moved around since then. And it's sort of, you know, it's trying to continue and eke out the pain. I don't think it'll necessarily have as much impact, though, as it might have had earlier on. I think, you know, if you sort of look at the footage and people dancing around and, you know, I think they're singing Fairy Tale of New York or something like that. I think if it had come out a few months ago or at the time, I think it would have probably prompted a really quite visceral and angry response, a little bit closer to the fact. I think now, though, we've had
I think
so
people are
many.
furious, Benedict, aren't they? People are furious that these people are flouting the rules whilst they were being told they couldn't have Christmas with loved ones or whatever.
No.
You
I
don't
think people have been furious. I think people have been furious. I think they have now just come to accept that there was so much misbehavior going on that it has now been priced in. I think that it is something that would have had a lot more impact if it had come out months ago, actually. I think it is now, sadly, probably going to be the sort of thing where a lot of people shrug their shoulders and they go, well, yeah, we all know that the government were not doing, members of the government, members of the Conservative Party were not behaving as they should have done. I think that's the thing. This is a very sort of, I think this has been poorly timed, actually, if it has been held back, because I think it could have done a lot more damage earlier on. Now, I think, given that Boris Johnson has left and we've had all the drama, I think it's almost just like a sort of an echo of the entire period. I think people are still annoyed about it, but I don't think it's going to hurt Rishi Sunak or the Tories any more than this whole story has already done, ultimately. I think that we've had that moment where it was incredibly damaging, and now that pain is priced in.
What do you think about that, Sophia? Would you agree with that?
A bit of both, really. I think for the people whose lives were wrecked by COVID, who lost loved ones, who were not allowed to be with loved ones as they were passing away, these kind of incidents and stories are going to always be extremely painful for them. And, think about those nurses and doctors and carers that we were out clapping for every night. The ones on the front line desperately trying to save lives. I mean, where I probably would agree with Benedict is that, the context of this, I think it was during the tier system. And what a confusing time that was. Obviously not remotely excusing their behaviour or anything like that, because I was at home trying to figure out all of these rules myself. I remember elderly people I knew that were terrified of sort of crossing tier borders to go to their normal supermarket because they weren't sure if it was within the rules or not, or if they were going to get in trouble, and restaurants on one end of one road that were closed because they were in the wrong tier and a restaurant at the other end was allowed to be open. It was a really mad time, to be honest, and not that I'm excusing their behaviour or anything like that, but I think we should just sort of like Benedict's point is quite valid, that times have moved on. The people that are going to be angry are going to continue to be angry and hurt by this, and I sort of question as well, is this a useful time, a good use of police time looking into this now? And that's another issue that's sort of been raised as well, because the police are now sort of looking at this video now it's emerged. So I'd have questions over, is that a good use of police time at the moment, looking at all these old COVID laws that are not in place now?
Yeah, interesting point. Well, let's have a look at the front of The Guardian. They're still angry about it. Their headline, pressure on Sunak as Met Police consider latest Partygate video. Whether or not this is going to have much impact, Benedict, what is potentially going to have a big impact are these four by-elections that are coming up. Plus, of course, Boris Johnson with his column in the Mail. He says he's not going to talk about politics, but you can bet he'll lob a few grenades in over the next few months.
Well, that's the thing. That's why I do think that this whole sort of, and it is a fiasco. It has been appalling, Partygate and everything that sort of went on around it. It has done a lot of damage. I do think we've now moved on to slightly more, if you like, acute sources of pain, certainly for the government. I think that, the key things are going to be around things like cost of living, whether or not people feel poorer at the end of Rishi Sunak's time in office than they did before. These are the sorts of things that are going to really, I think, stick the boot in for him. And I think we are going to see that reflected now in these by-elections. Of course, this has all happened not all of it, partly as a result of Boris Johnson, who was, of course, brought down by Partygate, at least in part. But what we're going to see now, I think, is a barometer of just how irritated people are with the government and how it is handling many things, not just Partygate. It can be immigration, it can be energy policy, it can be anything you want. We're going to see what people really think. And the key thing, of course, here is a lot of these are, several of them are pretty safe Tory seats. So if you see sort of large majorities being hammered down quite a lot, that could be cause for some real alarm bells, I think, for Rishi Sunak. So I think it is a bit of a headache. We do need to remember he does still have a sizable majority. He's going to still have a sizable majority for some time. But what he can do with that, I don't know at this moment in time. But far more than the local elections that we had recently. This is, I think, going to be an opportunity for a lot of voters to give the Tories, perhaps rather than Rishi Sunak himself, a proper slapping. So we wait with bated breath to see just how bad those could be.
Yes, interesting, isn't it? And you were talking about all the various issues facing the government at the moment. Let's turn to one of them, mortgage rates, front of the Daily Mail. I think it's the 13th consecutive increase we're expecting on Thursday, Sophia. The base rate set to go up from 4.5% to 4.75%, possibly even more than that. But the Mail is saying that the bank are being told to wait because it's just going to be so painful for members of the public coming off fixed rates or on variable rates.
I mean, they make a very good point. It will. It's already very, very painful for some people that have already had to remortgage recently and seen their rates soar. It's going to get even worse. And, sort of listening to some of the case studies on the news today, people are really, really worried about how they're going to pay their mortgage. They're already struggling with bills, with paying for food. The price of everything is going up, but these mortgage rates, I mean, the amount they will go up by, it's going to really hurt people in their monthly payment. We're not talking a few pennies here. We're talking hundreds of pounds that are hitting families at a really difficult time. And to be frank, it's an absolute nightmare for millions of homeowners who are going to have to remortgage. Already having to pay hundreds into their monthly payments. I mean, it's a bit of a contentious issue politically. I know Jeremy Hunt has backed the Bank of England and says, there's no real alternative to raising interest rates. It's what needs to be done to bring down inflation. There's also, obviously the Daily Mail wants the Bank of England to do something and not raise it. But there's also another debate raging, people that want to see the government step in and help people with their mortgage payments. I think that's sort of come on the back of huge interventions over the past recent years, sort of energy bills, COVID, furlough, and things like that. So there's it's stinging people, real people in their wallets right now. And it's also sparking a huge political debate. And I think this is going to really dominate this week's discussion, certainly with MPs and, your ordinary man and woman outside of Parliament.
Yeah, it's a very tough one, isn't it? Front of the eye, it's the same story. Banks told to help ease soaring costs of mortgages as rates rise. I mean, is there an argument, do you think, Benedict, to pause a rise, even if it's just for a few weeks, or is that going to prolong the pain in the long run?
I think it will just end up prolonging the pain. This is going to be a dreadful situation for a lot of people, but I don't really see how else we can go through it. I mean, the part of the problem, of course, is with people suggesting that maybe the government should step in is, again, we're all going to end up shouldering that burden down the line with interest. It doesn't really solve any of the problems that we have. Trying to get sort of major government interventions and things like this. Of course, an open-ended guarantee on energy prices was what partly did for Liz Truss. I'm not sure what it would do for Rishi Sunak to sort of swoop in and say, it's all right, I'll pick up the slack in, potentially millions of people's mortgages over the next couple of years. That could be very bad. But it's something of an existential crisis for the Tories, because a lot of the people who are going to be really hurt by this are young people, young families, people who have just got on the housing ladder or haven't been on it for very long. Relatively, the sort of people that the Conservative Party ought to be appealing to, and that we can see from polling across the board are just not enamored with the party at all. They do feel that their living standards have gone down substantially. It's been very difficult to get onto the housing ladder, and now it's about to be very difficult for a lot of them to stay on the housing ladder. It's a curious sort of crush of potential Tory voters who are being driven away from the party because of the situation that they find themselves in, but the country can't really afford, I'm afraid, for the government to come in all guns blazing and try to bail them out. This is as a result of many, many issues, but one of the main thing is it's about housing policy. You don't build enough houses, you're always going to have these sort of crunches, prices going up. So even if we didn't have these interest rate issues, we were always heading for a bit of a bottleneck when it came to the housing market in this country.
Yeah, Sophia, you're agreeing with that. And just a final thought from you, as the Eye mentions here, it's also very difficult for people to see mortgage rates going up, but savings rates aren't going up at the same extent.
Yeah, it's a bitter pill all round at the moment, isn't it? It's not just a pinch; it's a real big nip in terms of the cost of living crisis at the moment for everyone, from the poorest to those that are quite wealthy, and the jams. They're just about managing. Everybody is feeling it.
Front page of the Times, Sophia. Interesting story, this. Ministers apparently concerned, according to the paper, that the rules aren't strict enough about who gets council housing priority, coming, of course, at a time when net migration is at record levels.
Yeah, this is a seriously eye-catching story on the front page of the Times. I think it's a classically sort of polarising, eye-grabbing story. Essentially, sort of, they're saying that ministers want to prioritise British nationals so that they sort of shoot up the council housing ladder, and sort of migrants would be or immigrants, sorry, would be pushed further down. It doesn't say which department this story has come from or which ministers are looking into this. My suspicion would be Michael Gove's department, which is in charge of housing. And it feels quite Michael Gove-esque. He's very good at eye-catching, media-grabbing stories. So I wouldn't be surprised if it comes sort of from his camp. I think the language and rhetoric in this story will be quite polarising. Government source uses the phrase, that they want to stop migrants jumping the queue for housing. And that's certainly going to, infuriate and upset some people, certainly on the left. And I think even some Conservatives on the left of their own party won't like that kind of language. But, the government clearly thinks that this story is going to chime with voters, and they've clearly singled out sort of migrants and small boats as an issue, as a sort of visual that they want to campaign around ahead of the next general election. I mean, I think sort of reading through the story, I would sort of gently point out that this story points out that sort of 1 in 10 on the social housing list are non-UK nationals. And, there's currently 1.2 million households on the waiting list for this. And that's not 1.2 million people, that's households. So my big question surrounding this story is, what social housing? Where are they getting this social housing from? There's 1.2 million households on this waiting list for a reason. The migrants, the immigrants are a very small proportion of this 1.2 million households. The real issue here is there's not enough homes being built in this country,
which of course is exactly the point Benedict was making when we went into the break, wasn't it? That we just don't have enough housing stock. Benedict, what do you think about what Sophia was saying there? Is this a genuine story, or is it clickbait?
I mean, six of one, half does the other. I think Sophia is right to point out that we need the houses to be built. Of course, she's right to point that out. I think it is a genuine concern, though, that very often we hear about plans where housing developments are going to happen, and people and developers say that a set amount will be set aside for social housing. At which point, then, if you're considering that 10% of the people who are on the list aren't necessarily from the UK, and that those numbers are rising every year, I can see why politically it might be an issue for a lot of people who might feel as though they shouldn't be prioritised on the list. But as Sophia says, it's not so much of an issue if nobody's getting into the houses, because that is, in fact, the issue, the block. And I mean, we had yesterday the Prince of Wales gave an exclusive to the Times where he said that he was going to use the Duchy of Cornwall's land to build social housing. He was talking about building, small, but wanting to expand this. And I think it is something, broadly speaking, housing that is going to come to define, I think, a lot of political arguments over the next decade, because it doesn't matter what it is. If it's starter homes for young professionals, if it's social housing, if it's temporary accommodation for migrants, it doesn't really matter what it is. We don't have it in any kind of abundance. Dealing with that issue will be crucial. But the problem is, and the reason why it doesn't get done, a lot of voters don't want it to happen near them. They're happy with the idea in general, just not near them. And that's why houses don't get built in this country, because people, as much as they say that they want immigrants, they want people to get on the housing ladder, they want all of these things, they actually don't vote for it when push comes to shove.
Yes, which sort of leads us nicely on to our next story, which is on the front of the Daily Telegraph, because it involves planning laws. Sir Keir Starmer giving a big speech, Sophia, tomorrow, and the Telegraph saying that the current ban on renewable energy source of onshore wind farms would be lifted if Labour get into power.
Yeah, this is a very, very sort of eye-catching policy from Labour. And I think this will go down really well with certainly young people. I think this will go down with. He's going to scrap the ban on new onshore wind farms, and he says this is going to be his sort of one of his first acts. If he makes it to number 10, and he's sort of vowing in this story to throw everything at his net zero agenda, firing the starting gun on the race to build more turbines across the country. He's giving a big speech tomorrow, I think, in Edinburgh. He's certainly in Scotland tomorrow, and he's going to sort of unveil, Labour's big local power plan. And it's all part of his kind of clean mission. I mean, he's previously announced a sort of new publicly owned clean energy company called GB Energy, and I imagine this will all sort of feed into that. And he wants to get more solar panels on public land, and he wants sort of local communities to benefit from clean power. It's interesting. I mean, more generally, I'm not sure, how much of a vote winner this stuff is. But I think if they can make the case that this is going to cut people's bills and, ease that kind of, bills at the end of the month and the cost of living crisis, I think that might prick some ears, actually. I think Labour has been in a bit of a reframing. I think they're reframing their green policies at the moment. I think it'd be fair to say over the past few weeks, they've sort of toned down a few pledges to sort of block oil and gas development, sort of saying that, we're not going to, shut down existing fields or revoke current licenses or licenses granted up to the general election. And they sort of backtracked on a big, I think it was £28 billion sort of green scheme, green prosperity scheme. So they have kind of been rethinking some of their green policies and dampening them down a little bit.
Yeah, OK. We're coming to the end of the hour, Benedict, but quick thought from you on this?
Yes, I mean, as with housing, you can't really have a sort of a functioning economy, one that wants to be technologically advanced, one that wants to sort of move forward, especially outside of the European Union, without being self-sufficient in energy and that energy being cheap. We're uniquely blessed in this country. We could have all the fossil fuels we want because we've got them in oil, gas and coal. We can have any number of nuclear power stations that we want. We have many different sites for them, and we have ample amounts of space onshore and offshore for wind farms. This should be a possibility. Again, we don't do it because people don't want it near them. And that is something that I think Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are going to have to be honest with people and say, we can have an energy revolution in this country. We can be self-sufficient. It can be cheap. We can even export it.